Hello, welcome everyone. Today we're going to discuss about some of the specific point and specific things about macroeconomics, and we will discuss some important point about policy and federal budget. Fiscal policy, changing in federal government spending or tax rate for the purpose of influence the macroeconomy. Fiscal policy is one of the two policy tools for managing the economy. Monetary policy is the others. Fiscal policy is decided by Congress and the President. The discussion of the fiscal policy focused on how federal government taxing and spending official aggregate demand. Government spending, balanced budget. When government spending and tax are equals, budget deficit. When the federal government spending more money than it receive it taxes in a government year. Budget surplus. When the government receive more money in taxes than if the it spend in a year. Total US government spending, net interest, all other spending, national defense, social security, healthcare. Government spending cover a range of services provided by the federal, state, and local government. Federal spending is nominal dollars, has grown by a multiple of more than 38 over the last 4 decades. State and local government spending. Spending by state and the local government increased from about 10% of the GDP in the early 1960s to 14 to 16 by the mid 1970. It has remained at roughly that level since. The single biggest spending item is education, including both K-12 spending and the support for public college and university, which has been about 20% in the GDP recent decades. Source: Bureau of Economics Analysis. Taxation, ability to pay principal, normative argument that citizens with more income or wealth should bear more of the cost of social program by paying a high tax rate since they have a greater ability to pay. Benefit principle, normative argument that taxpayers should pay in the proportion to the benefit they receive. Corporate income tax, a tax imposes on corporate profile. State and the gift tax, a tax of the people who pass assets to the next generation, either after death or during life in the form of gift. Exercise tax, a rate on a special good or a gasoline, tobacco, and alcohol. Flat tax, a proportional income tax system where all individuals pay the same income tax rate. Individual income tax, a tax based on the income of all forms received by the individuals. Marginal tax rate, the tax on one pay on the higher income on earns. Payroll tax, a tax based and the pay received from employers. The tax provide fund for the social security and Medicare. Progressive tax, a tax that collect a greater share of income from those with the income than from those with the lower income. Property taxes, tax based on the value of your home or other real estate. Proportional tax, a tax that is flat percentage of income earned regardless of the level of income. Regressive tax, people with higher income pay is smaller than of their income in tax. Sales tax, tax as a percentage of one retail purchase. Federal taxes. Federal taxes revenue have been about 17 to 20% of GDP during most period in recent decades. The primary source of federal taxes are individual income tax and the payroll taxes, the financial, social security, and Medicare. Corporate income tax and the social insurance tax provide smaller share of revenue. Progressive, proportionals, and regression taxes. Tax can be categorized as progressive, proportional, or regressive based on the how their marginal tax rate changes and as income goes up. A tax is progressive if you pay a higher marginal tax rate as your income rise. A tax is proportional if your tax rate does not change as your income rise. You pay the same rate at every income level. A tax is regressive if you pay a lower marginal tax rate as your income rise. State and local tax. The main revenue sources for state, local, and local government are sales tax, property tax, and revenue passes along from the federal government. Many state and the local government also levy personal and corporate income tax as well as impose a wide variety of the fees and charges. Some states rely more on poetry taxes, some on sales taxes, some on income taxes, some more on revenue from the federal government. National debt, the total accumulated has borrowed over time and not yet paid back. The federal government has run budget deficit of the decades. The federal debt is the sum of the annual budget deficit and the surplus. Annual deficit do not always mean that the debt or GDP ratio is rising. During the 1960s and 1970, the government often ran a small deficit, but since the debt was growing more slowly than the economy, the debt or GDP ratio was declined over this time. In the 2008 to 2009 recessions, the debt GDP or GDP ratio rose sharply. The equations of a balanced budget. Most economists view the proposal for a perpetually balanced budget with the bemusements. Economists would expect the budget explicit and surplus to the fluctuate up and down with the economy and the autonomous stabilize. Some supporter of the global budget amendments like the argue that since household must balance their own budget, the government should do. There is also no particular reason to expect a government budget to be balanced in the medium term of a few years. Automatic stabilizer, tax and spending rules that have the effect of slowing down the rate of decrease in aggregate demand when the economy is slowing down, and restructuring aggregate demand when the economy is sped up without any additional change in legislation. Discretionary fiscal policy, the government passes a new law that explicitly changes overall tax ratio and spending levels with the intent of influencing the level or overall economic activity. Standardized employment budget, estimate of budget deficit or surplus including the effect of fiscal policy, that is as if GDP were or potential. Automatic stabilizer, automatic stabilizer is include unemployment insurance, food stamps, and the personal and the corporate income tax. Automatic stabilizer like welfare programs such as food stamps automatic like in when aggregate demand fall. Contractionary fiscal policy that decrease the level of aggregate demand either through cut off in government spending or increase in tax. Expansionary fiscal policy that increase the level of aggregate demand either through increase in government spending or cut in taxes. Expansionary fiscal policy include increase consumptions by raising disposable income through cut in the personal income tax or payroll tax, increase investment by rising after tax profit through cut in business tax, and increase government purchase through increased spending by the federal government of the final goods and service and rising federal grant to state and local government to increase their expenditure on final goods and services. Fiscal policy can also be used to show down an overheating economy. Again, the AD and OD does not dictate how this contractionary fiscal policy is to be carried out. uh, aust- uh, Neoclassic fiscal policy and supply side economic. Uh, Austerity program, measuring taken to reduce budget deficit during recessions by raising tax and cutting government spending. Crowd out, federal spending and the borrowing causing interest rate to rise and business investment to fall. Crowd out can also be caused by the federal tax cut. Flat tax income tax, system where all pay the same tax rate. Laffer curve, Hill-Sharpe's relationship between tax rate and the tax revenue. If tax rates are high enough, lower rates actually increase revenue. Multiplier effect, ideal that the change in spending cause a more than proportionate changing in real GDP. Rheozonomic sees supply side economics. Supply side economics believe that economy activity is motivated by offered tax returns to the activity. So the tax cut on personal income increase labor supply, tax cut on saving increase saving, and tax cut on investment increase investment. Supply side economy. Supply side argue that three key elements affect the macroeconomy. Labor supply, which is determined by the wage and salary after tax are removed. Saving, which is determined by the after tax rate of return to savings. Business investment, which is determined by the after tax rate of return to the capital investment. A flat tax is proportional, meaning that all individual or corporation would pay the same tax. The Laffer curve is somewhat controversial in practice. Head Start program, a program for early childhood education directed at familiar with limited education and financial resources. Infrastructure, public investment in the public and externally good like roads and transportation features, water supply, school and hospital. When government conduct an expansionary fiscal policy, it may run afoul of the crowd out effect. Expansionary fiscal policy measure an increase in the budget deficit. When government borrows sake on up available financial capital and leave less of the private investment in physical capital. Public investment in physical and the human capital and technology. All government spending does not carve crowding out. Public infrastructure investing on physical capital can enhance private investment. In more countries, the government play a large role in society investment in the human capital through the evaluation system. Not all spending on educational human capital need to happen through the government. Research and development effort are the lifeblood on the new technology. Fiscal policy can encourage and research and development using either direct spending or tax policy. If we want to go for the quick review, what we find, what are some example of the fiscal policy? Describe the federal budget deficit and surplus trends. Describe state and local government spending. What are the major source of revenue of the US federal budget? What is the difference between regressive tax and proportional tax? What is the difference between deficit and debt? Explain how economic growth or decline can influence a budget surplus or budget deficit. Describe the arguments for or against requesting the US federal budget to the balance. Describe how fiscal policy can be described. Explain how expansionary fiscal policy can increase. Explain how contractionary fiscal policy can decrease. Explain supply side economy. Compare and contrast Keynesian and new classical approach. What is the crowding out on it physical capital investment? What is the economic growth tied of investment, physical capital, human capital, and the technology? These are the major things for this chapter, and by this from this chapter you can understand different kind of aspect of the economy. Thank you everyone for joining today's sessions. If you have any kind of questions, you can ask me. Thank you.